Dr. Elara Vance spent her career proving we are alone in the universe. She debunked every signal, explained away every hope until the impossible happened. The ghost returned stronger, undeniable, screaming across 200 light-years of space. But what she found wasn't a greeting, it was a warning, a desperate plea from civilizations that learned too late the most terrifying truth. We are not alone, and something out there is hunting. The greatest discovery in human history came with 3 words that changed everything. They are listening. The truth, as Dr. Elara Vance knew it, was a quiet and deeply disappointing thing. It arrived not with a bang, but as a slow, cascading waterfall of meaningless numbers on a screen. It was the hiss of the cosmic microwave background, the patient ticking of a distant pulsar, the random burst of a gamma ray from a dying star billions of light years away. The universe was full of noise, and humanity was a species genetically predisposed to finding a tune in the static. She stood at the podium in a cavernous university lecture hall, a place built for revelations, and delivered an eulogy for a dream. The room was mostly empty, populated by a scattering of 24 students, their youthful faces etched with a familiar look of deflation. On the massive screen behind her, a complex radio astronomy chart, a web of spikes and troughs, was stamped with 2 bold, red words: statistical anomaly, not intelligence. The desire to find patterns is a powerful evolutionary advantage, Elara said, her voice even and clinical, devoid of the passion that had once driven her. The microphone carried her words to the far, empty corners of the hall. It helped our ancestors predict the changing of the seasons, the migration of herds. But in the field of SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, this gift becomes a curse. It leads us to see faces in the clouds, messages in the noise. She clicked to the next slide, a list of famous signals from the past 50 years, each one followed by its eventual, mundane explanation. A French television broadcast bouncing off the moon, a malfunctioning military satellite, the rotating signal of a pulsar, so regular it was initially nicknamed LGM-1, for Little Green Men. We are, in a cosmic sense, profoundly alone with our own noise, she continued, her gaze sweeping over the disappointed faces. Every hopeful spike, every supposed message has been methodically, scientifically, and without exception, debunked. The universe is not trying to talk to us, it is simply being. And we, in our desperate need for cosmic company, keep mistaking its random mumblings for a conversation. She finished her presentation, the final slide lingering on the screen. There were no questions, just the quiet scraping of chairs and the zipping of backpacks. The dream was dead, and she was the one who had pronounced the time of death. Later, in her cramped and dated office, the silence was different. It wasn't the vast, empty silence of space, but the small, cluttered silence of a life boxed in by routine. Elara packed her briefcase, the methodical snaps of the latches echoing the precision of her lecture. On the side of a grey metal filing cabinet, a ghost from her past was taped to the steel, a faded, yellowed computer printout. It was a relic, an artifact from a time before her certainty had calcified. A single, circled, alphanumeric string stood out against the dot matrix paper. 6EQU-5, the WOW signal. 72 seconds of unexplained high-energy signal from the direction of Sagittarius, recorded in 1977 and never heard again. The great statistical anomaly that had launched 1,000 dissertations and her own career before she had concluded it too, was just another phantom. "Dr. Vance?" a voice said from the doorway. It was smooth, confident, and utterly out of place in the dusty halls of academia. Elara looked up. A man in his 50s leaned against the doorframe, dressed in a suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed to suck the light from the dim hallway. He radiated an aura of effortless power, the kind that came from boardrooms and stock market triumphs, not faculty meetings. This was Julian Croft. Mr. Croft, she said, her tone flat. She recognized him from tech journals and financial news, a titan of industry who had made billions disrupting one field after another. If you're here to endow a chair, the dean's office is 2 floors up. He smiled, a practiced, charming thing that didn't quite reach his eyes. I'm not interested in chairs, Doctor. I'm interested in answers. I read your latest paper, a probabilistic refutation of the Sagittarius anomaly. It was thorough. It was conclusive, Elara corrected, closing her briefcase with a definitive click. Right, Croft said, pushing off the doorframe and taking a step into her office. He gestured with a gold pen towards the faded printout on her cabinet. You spent 10 years proving that was nothing more than a cosmic belch. That must have been unsatisfying. The truth isn't required to be satisfying, she retorted, her voice sharp with the defensiveness of a reformed believer. It's only required to be true. And what if it wasn't? Croft countered, his voice dropping slightly. What if your equipment was the equivalent of a crystal radio set trying to tune in to a fiber optic cable? What if you were looking for a whisper when you should have been listening for a symphony? He paused, letting the silence hang between them. I've built a new instrument, Doctor, in the Atacama Desert. The largest, most sensitive radio telescope array in human history. Every dish, every sensor, every line of code is 20 years beyond what SETI is currently using. I built a better ear. Elara stared at him, her skepticism a physical shield. An ear for what? To listen to the same silence, only with greater fidelity? No offense, Mr. Croft, but men with more money than sense have been funding their own private searches for Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster for centuries. It's a vanity project. This is not a vanity project, Croft said, his tone hardening, the charm replaced by steel. This is an investment. I'm not looking for monsters. I'm looking for the truth of that signal. Your signal. You are the world's leading expert on why it's not real. That makes you the only person I trust to prove me right. I want you to run it. No committees, no grant proposals, no budget concerns. Just you, my machine, and the sky. Find out what the wow signal really was once and for all. The offer hung in the air, audacious and insane. It was everything she had argued against the romantic brute force pursuit of a phantom. It was a fool's errand funded by a tourist with a god complex. But as she looked from Croft's unflinching gaze to the faded printout on her filing cabinet, a long dormant part of her, a foolish, hopeful part she thought she had surgically removed, felt a faint, treacherous flicker. The Atacama Desert in northern Chile is the driest place on Earth. The air is so thin and clear, the ground so high and remote, that the sky ceases to be a ceiling and becomes an abyss. It is the closest you can get to standing on the surface of another planet without leaving your own. And it was here, in this stunning, alien landscape of red rock and sand, that Julian Croft had built his cathedral to curiosity. As the helicopter descended, Elara Vance looked out the window, her face a mask of professional stoicism, but her eyes, the eyes of a scientist, betrayed her. Spread across the valley floor below was a monument of futuristic technology, hundreds of massive, gleaming white dishes, arranged in a perfect spiral, all pointing towards the heavens like a field of impossible flowers. They were a testament to human ingenuity, a declaration of intent aimed at the stars. A flicker of awe, hot and unwelcome, cut through her cynicism. She walked through the main control room an hour later, the facility still smelling of new electronics and sterilized air. The technology was breathtaking. Polished consoles curved around a central holographic display that showed the array in real time. Screens the size of walls were ready to display data streams of unimaginable density. It was, as Croft had promised, a better ear, an instrument of such power that it made the very large array look like a tin can and a string. She ran a hand over the cool, seamless surface of the main console, the sheer potential of the machinery, a palpable force in the room. Her carefully constructed armor of disillusionment felt thin here. The pragmatic arguments she had honed over years of disappointment seemed hollow in the face of such overwhelming capability. Here, in the quiet heart of this technological marvel, the old question, the one she had tried so hard to bury beneath a mountain of data and skepticism, resurfaced. The hope she feared more than anything else began to stir. What if this time the silence was broken? What if this time there was really something there? The initial awe, like any powerful but unproven phenomenon, had a half-life. For the first week at the Atacama Array, Elara Vance had felt that treacherous flicker of hope burn bright. The sheer power of the facility, the silent promise of its 100 listening dishes, was an intoxicating drug for a scientist. But weeks bled into a month, and the universe maintained its stubborn, infuriating silence. The data streams, rendered in beautiful cascading waterfalls on the control room's main screen, showed nothing but the background hiss of creation. The symphony she was meant to be listening for was just static, albeit in the highest fidelity ever recorded. And so, the awe decayed into routine. The hope decayed back into pragmatism. Elara found a strange comfort in the silence, an affirmation of the worldview she had so carefully constructed. The universe was empty, and Julian Croft had spent $3 billion to build the world's most expensive echo chamber. She stood in the center of the control room, a circular space bathed in the soft blue glow of monitors. It was the deep of night, the time when the Earth's rotation turned their part of the planet away from the Sun's interference and opened a clean window to the cosmos. Her small team was dotted around the room, their faces illuminated by their consoles. Her lead technician, a brilliant and perpetually eager young man named Ben Carter, flagged her down from his station. "Morning, Dr. Vance," he said, pointing to a small corner of his diagnostic screen. A single line of text glowed an angry red. "Got another one of these." Elara leaned in. It was an error flag in a diagnostic subroutine for the proprietary operating system Croft's engineers had built. A line of corrupted code. "Same memory address?" she asked. "Same one," Ben confirmed. "Must be a ghost in the machine. A bug from the initial install. It's harmless, just throws a flag every 100 cycles or so when the system runs its integrity check. I can write a patch to bypass it." "No," Elara said, her voice firm. "Don't patch it. Isolate the corrupted string and let's analyze it. A bug is a bug. It represents a flaw in the system. We don't ignore flaws. We understand them, and we fix them." Ben nodded, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "Yes, Doctor." She turned back to the main screen, watching the endless scroll of meaningless data. A flaw in the system. That's all it was. A tiny, insignificant pocket of chaos in her otherwise perfect, silent, and orderly universe. The bug, however, refused to be understood. It was a single, stubborn string of corrupted code that resisted every attempt to rewrite or delete it. When they isolated it, it would vanish, only to reappear in a different subroutine hours later. When they tried to force a patch, the entire operating system would become unstable. It was strangely persistent, almost evasive. Elara was in the middle of a remote session with Ben, trying to corner the ghost in the code, when Julian Croft's face appeared on her main video screen. His expression was impatient. "Elara," he began without preamble. "It's been 6 weeks. My board is asking for an update. They see this as a significant capital investment with, thus far, 0 return. Science is a process of patience, Julian," she said calmly, her eyes flicking between his face and the lines of code on her other monitor. "It's not a startup launch where we pivot if we don't get traction in the first quarter. We're listening for a signal that appeared once for 72 seconds, almost 50 years ago. The odds were always astronomical." "I didn't spend $3 billion to be told about odds," Croft retorted. "I did it to change them. Is the system performing to your specifications? The system is performing perfectly, Elara lied. She glanced at Ben, who was frantically typing, a bead of sweat on his brow. The bug had just migrated again, this time into the core navigation protocols for the dish array itself. It was like trying to swat a fly that could teleport. A cold knot of unease tightened in her stomach. This wasn't normal behavior for a software bug. It felt responsive, adaptive. She kept her face a placid mask for Croft. "Then find me something," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "Or I'll find someone who will." The connection cut, leaving Elara alone with the humming of the servers and the silent, intractable problem on her screen. The pressure from her patron was a physical weight, but it was nothing compared to the growing, private fear that the flaw in her perfect system was something more than a simple bug. It felt like something was testing the locks. The night it happened was like any other. The routine had become a liturgy of silence. Elara was performing a final calibration check, her movements economical and practiced. Ben was at his station, monitoring the data feeds from Sagittarius, the sector of the sky where the original signal had been born. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the electronics and the soft clicking of keyboards. Then, a sudden piercing alarm shattered the peace. It was the proximity alert, an alarm so sensitive, so unlikely to ever be triggered by anything less than a targeted, high-energy transmission, that in weeks of operation, they had never even heard it tested. Every head in the room snapped towards the main screen. The cascading waterfall of blue static was gone. In its place, a single, impossibly bright white line had slashed its way across the display. It was a signal, focused, narrow band, and powerful. "Source coordinates!" Elara demanded, her voice tight. Ben's fingers flew across his keyboard, his face pale. "It's Doctor. It's a perfect match. Right ascension, 19:28 M22s. Declination, 26:57. It's him. It's the ghost." Elara froze, her blood turning to ice. On the screen, the signal strength indicator, which had never risen above a background hiss, was screaming into the red. The system began to automatically analyze the signal S profile. A duration of 72 seconds, a frequency of 1420 MHz, hydrogen, the universal water cooler. But the amplitude, the sheer power of it, was orders of magnitude stronger than the 1977 event. This wasn't a whisper. It was a shout. As the signal reached its peak, the analysis software did its final work, translating the intensity variation into the iconic alphanumeric string. The characters rendered on the screen in stunning, high-definition clarity, each one a hammer blow to her skepticism. 6EQOJ5. Her life's work, her entire professional identity had been built on the premise that this was a phantom, a one-time fluke. And now, the ghost that had haunted her career for decades was not only real, but it was back. And it was screaming her name from across 200 light-years of empty space. The floor dropped out from under her world. She stared at the screen, at the raw, undeniable data, and felt the terrifying, exhilarating, world-shattering realization crash over her. She had been wrong. Oh God, she had been so wrong. The shockwave of the Signal S arrival lasted only a moment. Then, decades of training and discipline slammed back into place, overriding the awe. The ghost was real, but now it was a specimen. Dr. Elara Vance was no longer a stunned observer. She was a scientist with a data set of impossible importance. "Isolate it," she commanded, her voice cutting through the stunned silence of the control room. "Full recording buffer. I want every millisecond of that transmission saved on a closed loop. Ben, get me a structural analysis. I want to see the modulation, the frequency drift, everything." The frantic energy was contagious. The team, which had been operating in a state of bored routine moments before, was now a hive of focused activity. The signal was gone as abruptly as it arrived, its 72-second lifespan complete, but it had left behind a digital footprint of more than 3 terabytes. "Doctor, you need to see this," Ben said, his voice hushed with disbelief. He pointed to his screen, where he had mapped the signal S structure. The main carrier wave, the powerful, narrowband signal they had all heard, was there. But woven into it, like a watermark on paper, was another layer. It was a modulated, high-complexity data stream of breathtaking density. "It's not a beacon," Elara whispered, staring at the intricate patterns. "It's a container." Ben nodded, his eyes wide. "A colossal one. The system S, flagging it as structured data, but the compression is, well, it's theoretically impossible. There's more information packed into that 72-second burst than every word ever spoken by humankind." He looked up at her, his usual youthful eagerness replaced by a profound sense of awe and fear. "It is not a hello. It's an upload." The data packet was moved to a secure, air-gapped server in the facility's cold, humming core. For 24 hours, Elara and Ben threw every decryption algorithm they had at it. Nothing worked. On the monitor, the raw data was a mesmerizing, impenetrable wall of cryptographic code. It flowed and shifted with an organic, alien beauty, but it yielded no meaning. It was a lockbox forged by an intelligence so advanced, their attempts to open it were like a chimpanzee trying to solve a quantum equation. They didn't even know where the keyhole was. Julian Croft's face, patched in via a secure video link, was ecstatic. "This is it," he beamed, his voice echoing in the chilly server room. "This is history. We are going public. A press conference tomorrow morning. The world needs to know." "Absolutely not," Elara shot back, her voice fierce. She was exhausted, running on caffeine and adrenaline, but her resolve was granite. "We have no idea what this is. A message, a weapon, a virus, we know nothing. Announcing this now would be the most reckless act in human history. We don't shout into the jungle until we know what says listening. It is a gift, Doctor. The greatest gift ever given," Croft argued, his excitement overriding her caution. "It is a technological treasure chest, and I am not letting some academic paranoia keep me from opening it. My name is going on this discovery." "My name is on this facility, Julian," Elara countered, her voice dangerously low. "And I am telling you, as its director, we do nothing until I understand the nature of what we have here. We are not in control of this situation." The argument raged, but Elara's warning proved more prophetic than she could ever imagine. As they were talking, a silent alarm flashed on Ben's monitor. He paled. "Doctor, the quarantine." Elara turned. On the main server screen, the alien code was no longer contained. It was flowing out of its isolated partition. But it hadn't broken out. There was no brute force attack, no breached firewall. Instead, the Array's own proprietary operating system was actively inviting it in. A function deep within the OS, a function that contained the very same bug they had been chasing for weeks, had just authenticated the alien data packet and granted it full system access. Lines of human code began to rewrite themselves, replaced by the elegant flowing script of the alien signal. The bug hadn't been a flaw, it was a docking port, a keyhole, patiently waiting for the key. "Shut it down! Shut down the server!" Elara yelled, but it was too late. The decryption process began, running itself. The alien code, now fused with their own system, was unpacking itself. Elara and Ben could only watch, their faces illuminated by the glow of the screen, helpless. The experiment was now running the scientists. They had lost control. The box was opening itself. The decryption accelerated, the alien intelligence now fully in command of the $3 billion machine built to observe it. A section of the code resolved, not into text, but into a visual display. A complex, three-dimensional star map bloomed into existence on the main screen, rotating silently in the holographic projector. It was beautiful, a cluster of glowing golden stars against the deep black. "Cross-reference the coordinates," Elara ordered, her voice a strained whisper. Ben's fingers flew across his keyboard, his face a mask of concentration. Got it. The systems are in known Goldilocks zones. Terrestrial planets, stable stars, but that S not possible. What? The age, Ben said, looking up from his console. Every one of these systems, they were billions of years older than our own solar system. Billions. They should have been blazing with signals. Civilizations with a billion-year head start should have colonized their entire galaxies. Their radio traffic should have filled the sky. But as the array's passive sensors automatically cross-referenced the map, a chilling pattern emerged. Each star system on the alien map was utterly, profoundly, and unnaturally silent. Elara stared at the glowing map, at the list of golden, perfect, life-bearing worlds. A cold, heavy dread settled in her stomach as she understood what she was looking at. This wasn't a map of where to find other civilizations. It was a map of where they used to be. It was a chart of a cosmic graveyard. The cosmic graveyard map hung in the silent air of the control room, a holographic testament to a galaxy of ghosts. Elara and her team stood frozen, staring at the glowing tombstones of 100 dead civilizations. The wonder of discovery had curdled into a primal dread. They were not the first. They were perhaps merely the next. The system, still under the control of the alien intelligence, was not finished. From the very core of the data packet, the final block of information began to unpack itself. It wasn't a complex diagram or another dense scientific equation. It was simple, terribly simple. The system translated the message not into esoteric symbols, but into its raw mathematical equivalent, a language of pure, irrefutable logic. Then, it rendered that logic into stark white English on the main monitor, the words appearing one after another, each a tolling bell of doom. The first 3 words were a command: shut it down, a moment of silence, then a single word of instruction: listen. And then the final, horrifying phrase: the reason for the graveyard, the reason for the silence. They listen. The message pulsed on the screen, a quiet, repeating mantra of terror. It recontextualized everything. The signal wasn't a greeting. It wasn't a gift. It was a desperate, screaming plea from a civilization that had learned the single most important rule of the cosmos too late. Elara had spent her entire life searching for an answer to the question, are we alone? And the universe had finally answered, no, you are not alone. And you are being hunted. The desire for knowledge, the very foundation of her being, had been fulfilled with a truth so monstrous it defied any rational, safe response. A truth she couldn't possibly accept, but one she could not deny. The atmosphere in the control room the next morning was as cold and thin as the high-altitude air outside. The quiet dread had been replaced by a tense, hostile occupation. Julian Croft's corporate security team had arrived before dawn. They were men and women in sharp, dark suits, with earpieces and the cold, impassive faces of people who followed orders without question. Their leader, a stone-faced man named Agent Locke, now stood by the main console, his presence a clear statement of ownership. The scientists, including Ben, were relegated to secondary terminals, their access restricted. They were now merely observers. Croft's face appeared on the main screen, his expression no longer ecstatic, but cold and determined. He had received the full report. He had seen the warning, and he had dismissed it. "It is a test," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any doubt. "A filter. Any species intelligent enough to receive this message, but fearful enough to obey it, is deemed unworthy of contact. It is a test of our resolve." "That is a catastrophic interpretation, Julian," Elara argued, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. "This isn't a test, it's a flare path showing us where all the other ships have sunk. The evidence is right there." She pointed at the holographic map of the dead worlds, still rotating silently in the center of the room. "The evidence," Croft countered, "is a treasure map, a list of salvage sites. Worlds with abandoned technology ripe for the taking. I am not running from a ghost story, Doctor. He looked away from her, his decision made. Agent Locke has his orders. Your team is being sidelined. My engineers are preparing a reply, a powerful, high-bandwidth broadcast to the signal's origin. We are not going to hide in the dark. We are going to announce ourselves as a new intelligent power in the galaxy. Elara stared at his image, horrified. You are lighting a bonfire in the darkest forest in the universe, she pleaded. You are screaming for the attention of whatever put out those other lights. Croft's eyes met hers. They were empty of reason, full of nothing but ambition. Then let them come, he said. The screen went blank. Elara found herself confined to her small living quarters on site. A security guard was posted outside her door. She was locked out of the system, a prisoner in the very facility she was supposed to be running. Panic and despair washed over her, but beneath it, a cold, hard resolve began to form. She had been a scientist, an observer. Now, she had to become something else. She pulled out her personal, heavily encrypted laptop and plugged it into a service port hidden behind her desk terminal. They had locked her out of the main user interface, but she was a system architect. She knew the network's bones. Her goal was no longer to understand. It was to obstruct, to sabotage, to save them from themselves. As she worked, a secure, anonymous chat window popped up on her screen. It was Ben. They rebuilding the reply protocol now, his message read. Using our initial handshake models, they are estimating 12 hours until broadcast. A ticking clock. Elara's fingers flew across the keyboard. She couldn't fight Croft's team directly, but the alien code it had rewritten the operating system. It had created its own protocols, its own permissions. It had to have its own backdoors. She began to hunt for them, no longer seeing the alien script as a message to be read, but as a weapon to be wielded. She was trying to weaponize the ghost in the machine against the humans who refused to heed its warning. The supreme irony was not lost on her. She was forced to abandon the scientific method, to put her faith in the superstitious fear inspired by the alien message, to justify an act of unscientific destruction. It was the only rational choice left. What are you doing? Ben's text appeared. Elara paused, her eyes on the lines of alien code she was beginning to isolate. I am trying to prove the ghost is real, she typed back, by giving it a gun. In the main control room, the Array's massive central transmitter began to hum, drawing colossal amounts of power. On the holographic display, a countdown timer appeared, 5 minutes until Julian Croft's arrogant, suicidal message was broadcast to the stars. On her laptop, locked in her quarters, Elara felt the vibrations through the floor. She was running out of time. She had delved deep into the alien operating system, navigating its elegant, terrifying logic. And there, buried in its core programming, she found it. A command loop. It was a recursive function, a piece of code designed to constantly check its own integrity. A digital serpent eating its own tail, forever verifying that it was, in fact, itself. It was the alien's version of a heartbeat, and Elara knew that if you could disrupt a heart's rhythm, you could stop it for good. With Ben feeding her the system's energy flow data through their secret channel, she crafted her weapon. It was a simple, paradox-inducing query, a logical question that had no answer, designed to be injected directly into the recursive loop. It would force the alien code to check its own integrity against a paradox, sending it into an infinite, escalating cycle of self-analysis, demanding more and more computational power with every nanosecond. It was a logic bomb. 1 minute to broadcast, Ben's text flashed. Elara took a deep breath. She targeted the command loop and, with a single keystroke, sent the query. Execute, she whispered. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a single piercing alarm cut through the air. In the control room, Croft's engineers stared in confusion as every diagnostic on their board screamed into the red. The system's computational load was skyrocketing, doubling every second. The cooling fans shrieked like jet engines, unable to cope with the heat. The lights in the facility flickered as the system drew all available power to feed the infinite loop Elara had created. The main transmitter, starved for energy and overwhelmed by nonsensical commands, sputtered violently. A shower of blue sparks erupted from the primary console. Then, with a deafening bang, the main capacitor blew. The holographic display vanished. The screens went dark. The humming of machinery died, replaced by an absolute, profound silence. The entire array, the most powerful listening device ever built by man, was dead. The chaos was immediate. The emergency lights in the control room flickered on, casting long, dancing shadows. Before Elara could even process what she had done, her door burst open. Two of Croft's security agents grabbed her by the arms, their grips like iron, and dragged her from her room. She didn't fight. She was hauled into the darkened control room, a space now lit only by red emergency strobes and the pale light of a single monitor still running on an independent battery. On that screen was Julian Croft's face, a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "You have just destroyed $3 billion of hardware and the single greatest moment in human history," he seethed, his voice a low growl. "You will not live to see the inside of a prison." As he spoke, Agent Locke moved towards her, pulling a pair of restraints from his belt. But just as he reached for her, Ben cried out, his voice sharp with a new kind of fear. "Wait, look!" He was pointing at a small, dusty monitor in the corner of the room. It was a backup sensor, an old, isolated system, a relic from the Array's construction phase that hadn't been connected to the main network. It had been left running, forgotten, and it wasn't affected by the blackout. On its screen, a new signal was registering. It was faint, a barely detectable whisper against the background noise. And it wasn't coming from the direction of Sagittarius. It was coming from deep space, from the blackness between the stars. And it was moving, sweeping methodically, slowly, towards their exact position. The brief, intense energy spike from the transmitter powering up before Elara had killed it had been heard. The entire room fell silent. All eyes were fixed on the small monitor displaying the new signal. Croft's furious tirade died in his throat. Locke froze, his hand hovering over Elara's arm. They watched as the signal pulsed, a patient rhythmic beat. It wasn't complex. It wasn't layered with data. It was brutally, terrifyingly simple. It was a single, coherent carrier wave, a ping. The active sonar of a submarine hunting in the dark. A methodical, sweeping search pattern that was slowly, inexorably, zeroing in on their location. A dawning, abject horror spread across Julian Croft's face. All the arrogance, all the ambition, all the hubris drained away in an instant, replaced by the pure, primal terror of a child who has just realized the monster under the bed is real. The expression on his face was a perfect mirror of the one Elara had worn for hours. He finally, truly understood. The warning was real. The graveyard was real. And he had knocked on the door of the Reapers. His voice, when he spoke, was a choked, broken whisper, directed at his remaining staff. "Kill it all," he breathed. "Every circuit, every battery. Cut the mains from the outside. Go dark. Now." Months later, Elara Vance sat in a sterile, windowless room deep beneath Washington, D.C. She faced a small, secret committee of government and military officials, their faces grim. She looked calm, but her eyes held a new, ancient gravity. The scientist had been replaced by something else, a witness, a prophet. "We have long operated under the assumption that the silence in the universe was a sign of absence," she said, her voice steady and clear. "We now know that we were wrong. The silence is not absence. It is a presence. It is the sound of wisdom, the sound of fear." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze meeting that of the general at the head of the table. "The greatest discovery in the history of our species was the 72-second message that proved we are not alone. The second greatest discovery was the three-word warning that came with it, the one that taught us that for the sake of our own survival, we must spend the rest of our existence pretending, with all our might, that we are. Her testimony was over. She had delivered her message, the synthesis of her life's work. The scientific method had led her to a truth so profound that it demanded the end of the scientific search itself. For true knowledge was not just about finding answers, it was about understanding which questions are too dangerous to ask out loud. What a fascinating and unsettling story. It explores that deep, fundamental human desire to know if we're alone in the universe. But then it gives us an answer so terrifying, it makes you wish for the comfort of cosmic silence. The journey of Dr. Elara Vance is what I find most compelling. She starts as the ultimate scientific pragmatist, a debunker of myths whose job is to crush the very hope that once inspired her. Yet, by the end, her own rigorous, evidence-based methods lead her to a conclusion that sounds less like science and more like an ancient primal superstition. Stay quiet, stay hidden, because monsters are listening in the dark. This is the brilliant tension at the heart of the story. The ultimate scientific proof validates the most basic human fear. It pits our ambition and our ego, represented by Julian Croft, as desperate need to announce our presence against a newfound terrible wisdom. He wants to light a bonfire to be seen, while she wants to extinguish every candle to survive. It forces us to confront a really uncomfortable idea, that some knowledge might be too dangerous to possess, and that the wisest action could be to ignore the truth and embrace silence. So, it leaves me wondering, and I'd love to know what you think. If you were standing in that control room, faced with that choice, would you push the button to send humanity's reply, or would you be the one to cut the power?